Hello and welcome. Today I want to share a service locator system that I made to use in Unity projects. Uh, it's a very useful design pattern to decouple like reference between the objects that you need to get their information. Like in this example here, I got the player object and the enemy, and this enemy is like a follower that follows the player, like an AI, and all it needs to know about the player is the position. So you don't need to have a reference to the game object or something like that. Uh, and also, if you make a prefab of this and wants to use gameplay, you don't need to use some kind of find method to locate the player. You can use this service locator right here. I will first demonstrate how it's currently working, then will show the implementation. So here I got the player. You can see that it's disabled, so the player does not follow uh, the player. The enemy do not follow the player. And if I activate and move around, you can see that it's following the player, and it do not have a reference directly to the player game object. And if I disable the player, you can see that this stopped following because the service became unavailable. And if I, let's say that I duplicated this enemy, and even if I activate this, let me make this move speed slow. If I activate the player, you can see that both work the same way. They're using the same service, the player transform service, and they do not have a reference to the player. They have a reference to the PlayerTransformService, but even if you spawn player new enemy, it's much easier to control this uh, information where you need to have uh, like the player transform. It's a very, let's say, core information in our game, not only for AI but for some other stuff too. So Uh, that's how it works, right? You can also create an health service for the player where you have an event where when you update the health amount, and you can use this to update the, let's say, the UI for the player, and where you don't need to have a reference to the player component, you just need to get the service and start listening to the event. So let me show how it's currently working. First, let's go to the player transform service. So the service are basically split between their abstracted version, their interface, and the actual implementation. So here in this interface, I player transform service where it inherits from the service just as a base. This service does not contain any information. It's just served as a base service for all the service on the game. It's useful to um, cache and cast the service, but I'll show that later. Uh, so here in the player transform service, this interface, I got the player position, the player rotation. And here on the actual implementation, where it's a mono behavior, it implements the player transform service. I just override these properties to get to return the in the player position, I return the transform position, and in the player rotation, I return the transform rotation from this game object right here. And here on enable and on disable, I just registered the service using this to pass this instance of a service. And on disable, I just registered this service, the player transform service. All right, so uh, that's basically it, how it works to implement new service. For example, we want to return a new property like public vector. player scale. Can I make like this? And here on the player transform service, you can just implement the interface and return the transform dot scale. Of course, there's the uh, last scale as well. This really depends on what you want to return, but that's how you can um, create new properties, all this stuff. And who wants to know, and anyone that needs this property can just rate this. And this is how you can create and implement this service. And to use the service, like the player follower. So the first thing that we got here in the player follower is a variable from the PlayerTransformService, where we assign here on the on this method on PlayerTransformServiceAvailable. So here on this GameServiceLocator, we add on change service availability stats listener. So, and we need to specify which service, in this case, the player transform service, and the callback, this one right here. And if the service availability stats is available, then we get the service. And then we enable this behavior because how it does is follow the player. So the core, let's say, dependency from this component is the player transform service. So we don't need to keep running the update with something like player transform service is not equals to no to run. Since it needs to the service to run, we don't need to make this check. We can just disable or enable once the service became available. Else, if it's not available, we just disable this behavior so the update don't run and we don't follow the player. And it wants to try, just remove the listener. And that's it for this service user. All you gotta do is create the service variable and get once became available using this method here. So let me go to the game service implementation. Well, first I got the service availability status where it just returns if it's available or unavailable. Then we got the IService where it's like I said, it's the base service for all the services. And then we got the GameServiceLocator. Well, this is a static class. All right, so you can access anytime during your game. You don't need to have a real reference on the scene or something like that. You can just access in this class. And then we got two static private dictionaries, one for the actual game service, like the player transform service or any other service in our game. And we got the service availability callbacks, where the listeners get stored inside this delegate. So um, let me skip this part first. I'll go here on the register game service. So here I got the register game service method where it just takes an IService as a generic parameter, so we can pass like the player transform service. And here I'm getting the service name, checking if the game service already contains this value, and if it does, we just override. It's set to override by default, so we just update the service service availability status, and evoke the change. But I will come back to there later. Else, if it does not contain, like it's the first time we're registering this service, we just create a new service definition, passing the service instance, the service name, and by default the availability is set to available. Then we add to the dictionary and notify the users about the service availability. Alright, and here we got the register game service. It's basically the same thing, but instead of overriding with a new instance, check if it contains the service that we want to register inside the game service dictionary. And if it does, we just override to no. And here is the method called by the PlayerFollower, where we add the service availability status listener. First set the generic type of the service and then the callback. And here's basically the same thing. We get the service name. We add to this listener callback for the service. For let's say the PlayerTransformService contains a list of these listeners, so we just combine all together inside this delegate. And then we just check if already contains the service, then we directly invoke the listener. Here, the service, I added this listener, and if it's already available, I just invoke setting as available, so you can get the service like this. And here's the same thing. I just remove accessing the service availability callbacks and remove this callback here. And here's the method for getting the service. We just need the generic service and return the service as a cast to the generic using the name of this service. It's just accessing these dictionaries and returning the values. And this is the method to notify the users. You just get the service name, the availability status, and invoke the delegate, passing this as a parameter so we can use here if it's available or not. So that's it for this service locator. It's pretty simple. We just register and notify the users of the availability. And here on the initialize unload method, I just listen to this event where it updates the service availability status for any service. So this is a static method, static action, event action, where it's just return the service name and the availability. So this service definition is basically a container for the service, where on the constructor we set the initial service instance, the service name, and the service status. The method to override the service just set this current service to this instance that we pass as a parameter. Then we update, checking if it's null, because if we pass a null service, then it's unavailable because we can't read any value from null. Else, we set the service as available. And then we invoke the static event action, passing this instance service name and the current availability status that we just updated here. And here's the method to get the service that it's only called here in the service locator. So yeah, that's it for this service definition. It works really well because it notifies you about when the service became available or not, so you can like manipulate your behavior depending on your needs. In this case, I just disabled the behavior if it's not available. but you can change whatever you want because the service availability status returns if it's available or not. Alright, so yeah, that's it for this service locator. Just need to register and use it, and to create new properties, events, or anything like that, it's pretty simple. Alright, so let's say you want to create an event for, let's say that this is a health component, a health service. We can just create an action that returns like the current health, data health, and then we can use this for like the follower, the player transform service updated health, and add here the listener for your needs. And here on the player transform service, we can actually update the health here. All right, so that's how you can use this service locator to create any kind of service to decouple the dependencies on your actual implementation from these objects, in this case, the player. All right. So yeah, that's it. I will upload these scripts to GitHub and also the package for this service locator. And yeah, that's it for this video. I hope you'll like it, and I will see you on the next one.